Why don't you try both of them yourself and make your own top 3? It could be more like hers, could be more like mine, or it could be a combination of the both. It's just simply identifying what's best for you and what works for you, and just which approach you align best with. Apparently the educational content seems to be preferred because we actually have quite a lot of new people on the channel. So if you're here and you're new, or if you're here and you aren't new, I appreciate you being here. So thank you for tolerating me and my endless waffle about things I actually find quite interesting, which largely stems into the realm of training, resistance training, and things that involve weights, basically. Which actually brings us on to, apparently, growing monster quads with these 5 exercises featuring Kelly Matthews, somebody who I've actually spoken about on the channel fairly recently and somebody who I was very impressed by. So immediately, you know my expectations for this video are going to be very high. And like with all videos, the deal still remains. If throughout this entire video you actually learned something you didn't know from this video, I'd really appreciate it if you did click the button down below to subscribe to the channel. But if you didn't learn anything from the video, I'd appreciate the dislike, and I would really welcome and encourage you to send me an abusive message on Instagram, because it brings me back to the memories of bullying from my childhood.
The first exercise we're going to do is a barbell back squat, tried and true. But it's important that you know that there are certain things you need to do in order to get the maximum quad stimulus out of your back squat.
So firstly, the back squat itself is a fine movement. Is it one of my preferred quad movements? Going to be honest with you, no. The only time I would really kind of encourage incorporating a back squat into your program is if you need to for your sport. So let's say powerlifting, you are essentially assessed by partly your ability to squat, therefore you kind of have to squat, or due to desire, because you actually just like squatting. I think that's a very fair reason to include a movement, or potentially due to lack of alternatives. If they aren't considerations, more often than not, I'm probably not going to include the back squat, and there are many reasons for that, which I'll cover very shortly. You'll notice that Kelly, she actually spoke about this herself, is wearing lifting shoes. So they are shoes that have an elevated heel. This elevated heel is actually quite nice if you have a bit of an ankle mobility deficit, which might make it harder for you to hit depth, but also it puts you in a position where it's going to encourage a bit more knee travel. So growing up, going through the industry for many, many years, as I have been now, we were always told, especially back in PT school over 10 years ago, we were always told, do not let the knees travel over the toes, it's bad for them. No, it's not. Frankly, no, it is not. When you are looking at maximizing quad stimulus, what you want to then do is a maximized knee flexion. And with that, we want to maximize knee travel, because then that obviously indicates the knee is bending more, traveling further, and then the quads are going to be lengthening more, thus going through a greater relevant range of motion. Provided you are healthy without any pending injuries, this should not hurt your knees. What I would say you should probably be wary of is you're going to want to shift a lot of pressure over to your toes, because that's just habit for a lot of people. And then other people say, well, no, you should keep pressure on your heels. Both of those, I'd say, probably not. What you really want to do is focus on a triangle of pressure. So I always talk about driving your big toe, little toe, and heel into the ground, creating that triangle, thus allowing you to evenly distribute pressure across the mid-foot, which will again give you the best base to plant from and then squat from.
A barbell front squat isn't on this list. If you want a front-loaded squat, my biggest suggestion would be to do heavy goblet squats.
So, to be honest, when you're looking at maximizing quad hypertrophy, I avoid any kind of anterior loaded movement. So, movement where the weight is in front of you, like free weight primarily. Front squat, goblet squat, things like that. Because ultimately, although you can sometimes get better depth because it may allow some people to remain a bit more upright in the squat, the issue with these movements is that they might actually prevent you from training your quads effectively. Because if you do a goblet squat to failure, and bear in mind when we're looking at actually kind of maximizing growth or stimulus for a muscle, we must take the target muscle, being the quads in this case, to if not close to failure. If you're doing a goblet squat to failure, are your quads failing or are other variables failing? So are your arms failing, your shoulders, your core? If you're looking to take your quads to failure, but your arms are failing first, your quads might actually have a lot more in the tank, which means although the movement has failed, your quads haven't experienced the stimulus that they really should, and arguably you'll leave you a lot of gains on the table there. So again, that's why I always look at when kind of prioritizing the quote-unquote best movement to build a certain muscle. In a lot of cases, it might be, although I don't necessarily think there is a singular best, it might simply be the movement in which you can most accurately take the intended muscles to failure. Not saying that's the only variable to consider when looking at movement effectiveness, but it's a pretty big one. Kelly actually goes on to talk about the pendulum squat and how I believe she said it was probably her favorite quad movement, and I'm fully going to align with that. So I look at the kind of 2 primary squat pattern machines as my 2 favorite. Number 1, just personal preference, is going to be the pendulum squat as we're seeing here. Number 2 is going to be the hack squat. Both Both of those are very stable movements, and that's a big thing to consider, stability. Both of those allow you to go through a great relevant range of motion for the intended muscles, being the quad, which means you're obviously going to get a lot of knee flexion. And both of those allow you to hopefully train the quads to, if not close to failure, without external variables holding you back too much. So without your arms give you out, your core give you out, etc., because due to the support the machine provides and the stability the machine provides, you're not going to have to worry about those things as much as you would for, like I say, a free weight movement. The big thing here is bring your feet down. You'll see where Kelly's feet are on the pad. The big thing is when we bring it down, that's going to allow our knees to travel further. Don't bring it all the way down, because obviously you might end up doing tippy toes and calf raises. Probably not going to be best. You want to bring it down to the point where you feel you can maximize knee flexion. When you get into the hole and to the bottom of the position, I've mentioned this before, your knees might start shifting back. You'll see Kelly do it in a second. Just for a split second at the bottom, you saw the knees shift back. That's when a bit of tension is coming off the quads and probably shifting over to the adductors, being the inner thigh muscles, when in reality we kind of want to bring the feet down a bit more to minimize how much the knees will travel back and maximize how much the knees are going to keep traveling forward. The other thing with this is when you're taking these squat patterns to failure, with the barbell squat, it's a bit harder to do so confidently due to a safety element. With a pendulum squat and a hack squat, there are usually safety mechanisms involved that can catch you if you fail. Same with the hack squat. That's fantastic, because now you know that God forbid you do fail, you're going to be okay. You're not going to drop the weights, you're not going to be stuck in the bottom. You can fail safely, and that in turn will probably allow you to actually push the movement a bit harder, which then in turn, if you can then take the movement closer to failure because you're trying harder, it's probably actually going to result in a better stimulus for growth. I spoke about the leg extension quite heavily in the Will Tennyson video, so I don't really want to elaborate on it too much, and Kelly makes a really fair point here. There's not a lot you can really do wrong here, because the machine does essentially only allow you to do one thing, which is knee extension, which is the primary movement we're thinking of going through. Kelly also goes on to speak about the rec fem, which again, I don't want to repeat myself because I have mentioned this a lot in a couple of videos, but when you are looking at training the rec fem, which is a muscle of the quads, obviously quad meaning four, means four muscles of that muscle group, there's only one of them that crosses at both the knees and the hips, and that's going to be the rec fem. When you do a squat pattern, due to the fact you're moving at the hips and the knees, the rec fem's of respective length as a muscle does not change, therefore it's not getting adequately loaded. Whereas when you do a leg extension or a sissy squat, you're removing hip involvement and really focusing on knee extension, therefore the rec fem can get sufficient stimulus from those movements because its respective length is now changing. Because when you think about stretching a muscle, you make it longer, and then when you contract a muscle, you make it shorter. So let's say at the triceps, I'm stretching, I'm contracting. So it goes longer, shorter. Its respective length is changing, therefore it's going through a relevant range of motion. With the rec fem, when its respective length doesn't change, it's not really doing a lot of work. And some people perhaps actually might find they have knee problems because their rec fem is underdeveloped, because they might actually neglect movements like the leg extension because somebody has probably told them it's bad for your knees, when in reality, whoever told you that is probably a silly sausage and might only have bad knees themselves because they don't do leg extensions. Just a quick intermission, just to let you know that if you do want to work with me, Ryder or Beth on a one-to-one coaching basis where we can coach you towards your goals online, then please click the link down below in the description, or maybe even in the comment section, so you can fill in the application form, and then perhaps we can jump on a Zoom call, have a little chat, and just see if there's something worth exploring here. Online coaching is available if you just click the application form down below in the description or the comment section. So we move into a split squat, and I'm not going to fully agree with Kelly here, because although I do think it's a fantastic movement, due to the fact that stability is actually quite a troublesome factor when looking at split squat, that then in my eyes reduces its effectiveness when looking at purely isolating quad growth, because again, the really effective movements are the most stable ones. So when you're doing a split squat, how often do you spend half the movement wobbling and falling over the place, and how often do you fail because you've lost stability or balance? Things to consider. What Kelly is doing really well here, which I like, is she's keeping an upright torso, fantastic, and she's also elevating the heels again on this platform there, which again, like the squat, is going to allow a bit more knee travel, thus changing this to more of a quad bias split squat. Whereas if you had a flat foot and maybe leant forward a bit more at the torso, it might be a bit more of a glute bias split squat. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic movement, you know I do, but again, you've got to consider the stability impacts there. And if I were to include a split squat, as I actually often do, because like I said, I do think it's a fantastic movement, it's not always just about optimizing hypertrophy or the effectiveness of a movement for a single muscle group. I typically actually favor pushing it nearer the end. Stability at the start of the session versus the end of the session is probably probably not going to change too much, but at least if I can maximize stimulus earlier on for the quads and kind of use the big movements first, my quads might be a bit more fatigued at the end of the session, failure might come sooner, and then in turn, stability might be less of a hindrance when taking my quads to failure, because I may not fail due to stability, but because the fact that my quads are fried and have been fried through the whole session, therefore they're already closer to failure, and like I said, might not be as impacted by external variables. What I will say about a split squat, and this is, I know I obviously joke about split squats and how bad it is for my mental health. That, like I say, do I joke? It was not a joke at all. I've gone to therapy because of split squats. That's a lie. I've gone to therapy for many reasons, and split squats are only one of them. When I do split squats, which I do occasionally, I often have to remind myself that it's going to be really crap for a little while, because quite frankly, I don't know what it is about them, but they just torment me from a psychological perspective to an endless degree. Half the time I want to give up, not because my muscles have failed. Mentally, I'm not built to withstand the severity of the pain that split squats may induce on me. If I can't take the movement to failure due to the psychological trauma and fatigue they may induce, that could limit their effectiveness. What I would say, actually, funny enough, I do think doing unilateral movements is really good, so one leg at a time. Essentially, if you look at the biomechanics of a split squat, you can essentially do the same movement just on a leg press. A single leg press does pretty much the same thing. So I'm not saying you don't have to split squat, I'm just saying that I don't have to split squat because I'm scared of them. The thing is, we move on to a walking lunge now. Walking lunge, fantastic movement, respected, but I would rarely include both a walking lunge and a split squat at the same time. Not saying Kelly is, but I'm just saying they kind of do a similar thing. They both work the quads in more of a mid position, and they both go through a similar range of motion. Stability is obviously, again, going to be a limiting factor. I find myself, I can push walking lunges a bit harder because they're not as mentally and psychologically fatiguing as split squats, and they're not quite as bad for my mental health, but they still suck. What I would have actually preferred to see here in some place is probably a leg press variation, because again, when it comes to effective quad training, I really like to simplify things. Lengthened, mid and shortened position. So lengthened, I would do a squat pattern as my primary mover, so like a pendulum squat would be fantastic. Then if we look at a shortened position movement, we consider a leg extension primarily. That's kind of like your primary option there. Then we also consider a mid position movement, so I'd look at either a leg press, a split squat or a walking lunge. They all do relatively similar things. I can push the leg press harder, it's a bit more stable, and for me personally, it doesn't result in me having to cry to my therapist at 3 a.m. because of the nightmares that split squats have left me with. You think I'm joking, but I might not be. As a whole, I actually do align with a lot of what Kelly has said. I actually think Kelly's fantastic. I've only seen a few of her videos, but genuinely I've been nothing but impressed with her. I think she's bloody smashed it. I'm really happy I actually came across her stuff because we have very similar views on things, and I love how informative and educational she is. I love the information she's putting out there. I'm just saying that my top 5 would actually probably be a top 3, to be honest, and it might not be the same as hers, but that doesn't mean either is right or wrong. This is simply preference. Kelly's opinion in this case is just as valuable and is just as valid as mine, I believe. It really actually comes down to doing what's best for you. Why don't you try both of them yourself and make your own top 3? It could be more like hers, could be more like mine, or it could be a combination of the both. It's just simply identifying what's best for you and what works for you, and just which approach you align best with. Again, like I said, no right or wrong. It is simply just preference. But yeah, honestly, bloody good stuff. I love it, I respect it, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of Kelly because she's probably one of my favourites. But until the next one, which actually, I'll tell you what the next one I think is, it's going to be a back and bicep analysis, so I can talk about how you can better optimize your back training and your bicep training. I believe looking at one of Lean Beef Patty's videos, so stay tuned for that, now you know what's coming. But until then, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating the fact that I'm really warm wearing a jumper because it's actually quite hot outside. And thank you for tolerating the video.